like bites within the box.
I was like, that's her. He's like, it looks like a hedgehog. Her.
Oh, that's her. Yeah, I heard her. Her. He might say there was in for her.
Weird.
Yeah, her. Here's her. Her. HDR.
I don't know third base, right?
You my brother, we were.
We don't write anything on the same time.
Yeah, we were running, you want to stop it? I think we jumped off. Yeah.
You should split off the butt.
I did.
Working like you do that.
Yeah, my room's still changing.
He
lets me do everything.
Okay.
I've done top of it before. Me might really be looking around,
Yeah, like the
looking around double.
farmer. You have like a big call all over the thing.
Trip riders.
Yeah. So those are the videos when they fall off and where it's just like, keep going.
That looks fun. So we don't know about Jonas. Emily has a dentist appointment this morning. She will try to get to lab, but we're recording it for her. Yep. Well, we're gonna be looking at waterers and feed spaces, so. A little bit. In the barn, feed space, you probably don't have to get in with the cows, waterers, you're gonna have to get in for a couple minutes. We'll start there and continue on through, so. So we'll get started. Jonah thinks he wants to learn about waterers, he can show up, right? So we got a direct thank you from Dean Contento. All those VIP letters you signed on Wednesday went out on Friday. So there were 338 of them. That's how many accepted students we have across the programs in our division. So, the miscellaneous group, that's ag science, ag business and us, equine, horticulture, ag eng. So there's 340-ish accepted students in that pool. We had a lot of sorting and stuff and stuff to do on Friday, but we got it over by 4 o'clock, so hopefully it'll get moving as quickly as possible. I put another Dropbox up there for your final assignment. Some of you may have put it up already. There's 4 of you that may have put something up. Okay, so there's a new Dropbox there. Put your final thing in that new Dropbox. Today we're gonna go out and make sure we understand about how to measure, evaluate, feeding spaces and water spaces, making sure that everything's where it needs to be. Then if we have time at the end, we'll talk about, evaluating things. So, any questions or concerns? Not the Japanese people.
Yeah.
So we're switching over, no questions about feeding spaces, got it all down. So water space, so how does a cow drink? What's a natural position for a cow to drink? Head down. Yeah, probably goes through the mouth, not the ears. What else? Anything? Standing. So you're trying to find a position like this, where their mouth is below the water line, but their nose is out. So that can be difficult, given some of the waterers we put forth, but you've got that natural position. The jaw opens up, their lips are kind of pursed. They create the vacuum in their mouth, water comes in, they swallow, continue on through that, they breathe through the nose. So this is a picture there. We put cows drinking up on the internet, looks something like that. So muzzle, you got the side kind of sealed with pursed. She's gonna open her mouth up and draw that water in. That negative pressure, everything moves from a high to a low. So this is the classic picture we think of. Cows maybe knee deep in water, drinking through. That head is kind of a natural position down to the water. This is great in the north. What's the problem with that in the south? Alligators, there you go. So, yeah, I was dating a girl who was attending the University of Florida, and I went down to visit her, and she goes, yeah, don't go near the lake. Why not? Alligators. So can you imagine out on the quad out there or whatever, just having to worry about alligators coming up? So alligators, crocodiles, all that. So we want to foster that natural drinking position as much as we can. So there are recommendations based on that. So if we go and take a look at your facilities manual, if you want to follow along in that, we find the water space. Cows prefer to drink. We describe that 1 to 2 inches into the water, having their nostrils above. Long draws of water, usually 1 or 2 liters at a time, rather than smaller amounts and sips and slurps. So when you're watching a cow drink, what usually happens? Standing at the water, are they drinking the whole time? No, we say there's what? We allow a half hour to drink per day for animals. Probably active drinking in that space is 5 minutes. Consuming the water, there's a lot of slopping and slurping, right? So it looks like, thinking about that river and natural behavior, they want to clear water off. So, you probably don't want to plug algae in there, right? So they usually clear the water off in some way, or at least that's their habit. Or instinct. Put that nose down or mouth down so they get the lips underwater, but their nose is above. And if they're doing it right, they're taking those long draws where they open their mouth as opposed to slurp, slurp, slurp. They don't have to fight for it. So those slurps, the more an animal has to fight for water, the less likely she is to drink. And we know that water is probably one of the first limiters on production. The more water we can get into an animal, the better off we are. So why does an animal drink? So you know that if you look at the range of animals and track how much they drink, these 4 factors will account for most of the variation we see in total water consumed. So we know the more they produce, the more they're likely to drink. Cows seem to have a natural tendency, I don't know what this is related to, that after they get milked, they want to go and drink, at least at some point, especially in the summertime. Dry matter intake, the more they eat, the more they're going to have to drink to keep that rumen at that 20% dry matter, give or take. So their feed is what, 50%, 90% dry matter. It's got to dilute that down to 20%, and that takes a lot of water to do that when you do the math. Salt intake, sodium intake is very much correlated with the amount. The more sodium we have, the more they will drink. One of the ways to get your show animals ready is give them a little salt on the day of the show, among other things. Environmental temperature, as the temperature goes up, the desire to drink goes up as well. even though cows don't sweat really effectively, they bring in cool water to help cool things down, help with the transfer of heat to other spots. So what do we need to know? What do we need is a water system, fresh, clean water in adequate volume to meet the needs or requirements. How much does that animal have to drink? Can we provide that in those long draws? The animal doesn't have to fight for it, doesn't have to struggle to get what it needs. And we'd like our cows to drink comfortably in a semi-natural position. Well, what's the problem with having that down near their feet drinking opportunity in with cows? Gonna get really dirty real fast. So we tend to lift things up, trying to think about, okay, if they're wading into a river, what are they in there, 12 inches, then lifting their head. So it's a more of a function of where's the water level in the trough, and can they still get their head in on that kind of sloped angle? They don't have to go straight in like this, because that'll cover their nostrils. If they open their jaw with their nostrils in there, they're gonna get water in the nose, and most of us don't like that. So requirements for water planning on systems that can deliver that much water. That 50 gallons of water is related more to, you need a certain amount of water to clean the system, clean in place and things like that. So that's how we size the system to deliver 50 gallons per animal, but more normal intake is 30 to 40 gallons per cow. So the extra 10 gallons is associated with all the things that have to happen on a farm. So we need a system that can deliver that much water. So if you feel that the animals are not getting the water they might, how can we increase water availability and hopefully water intake? So adding additional sources of water to increase linear water space per animal. So there's a lot of places, especially in hot environments, where there's an opportunity going out of the parlor to animals to drink. We can increase the pressure and flow, so we don't have water spaces that get drunk down and cows have to come and wait, and there's nothing in here, I can't, water's not filling up fast enough. I have to wait my turn, and I may or may not get bumped out. It seems also the frequency of cleaning is important as well. So making sure that you have a system that will handle the water if you're doing additional cleaning. A manure system that'll handle that extra water. But it seems the places that really get into cleaning water tanks, there are some places I've been where every time the cows go away to get milk, those tanks are on a tilt. They get dumped every time, scrubbed out. Those tend to be very high producing animals. So that frequency of cleaning, my take on water is if you won't drink it, don't expect them to. There are places I've been, yeah, I wouldn't have a problem drinking that water. So, of course, it depends on how thirsty you are and what you've been doing, but. So if we start with tie stalls and thinking about those, I know this is not a strong area of interest here, but when we're thinking about water spaces and tie stalls, the traditional is how many drinking cups, at least where I'm from, they're drinking cups, people call them drinking bowls, do we have per stall? And there's a school of thought that, you know, maybe having one on each side of the stalls, that they're being shared on both sides, maybe there's an opportunity there for increased water intake. And are you willing to pay that extra $50 a stall to have that happen? So depends on kind of the initial investment and who's doing the work and all that stuff. But if you've got two animals, a dominant, very dominant, very subordinate, both will drink less if they're sharing a common water. So having another one on the other side, there may be an opportunity there to increase the total water intake. One of the big challenges with tie stalls is water flow. Especially in the summertime, you're bringing those animals. At my dad's place, he used to kick them out every morning, try to bring them in by noon. All of them hit those waters at the same time. You got a 2-inch line going around the barn. The ones at the end of the line, the farthest from where the water's coming in, are not getting any water at all. Especially when they want it, and if they have to fight for it, they're not going to drink what they could. So circular systems where water goes both ways are helpful. Making sure that if we've got a long line of 30, 40 cows, maybe we move up to a 4-inch line. So we get more water to those animals in times of excessive flow. There's a farm around here that they were dealing with like 1.5-inch lines for all the cows in there, and they have a well that just doesn't produce that much that fast. So water flow rates have to do with head pressure. Does everybody know what that means? The difference between the water, top of the water and the bottom of the water. If you want pressure, you need a higher column of water. That's why with dams, they want a high vertical thing there, and they do all their turbine work down at the bottom because you got more pressure. So being able to do that, so most places don't use their hay mows much anymore. This particular farm put a big tank up in the hay mow to get some head pressure on that 1.5-inch pipe. So all of the drinking cups, even the ones at the dead ends, had flow, had pressure when they needed it. So if it's a slow, continuous fill into a large tank up in that abandoned hay mow, you're going to have enough pressure to make sure you have all the animals receiving adequate flow of water from that system. So getting creative, figuring things out, if that's a tie stall, a direction you're going. So we mentioned with the Neil Anderson drawing, we've got the drinking cup either in front or behind wherever that drinking cup is. We'll have advantages and disadvantages. One of the big ones is what's going to get wet. Is the bedding going to get wet, or is the feed going to get wet? So those things have both undesirable. So how do you get around that? Another thing to consider with tie stalls is, do you have enough space between whatever's on top of the drinking cup to the drinking cup the cows can fit their head in? And I've been on some farms where they cannot drink in any sort of natural position. It's like tilted to the side. They're trying to slurp stuff in. They're making a mess because their head's in a funny position. So making sure you got that clearance, making sure the animals can access it, making sure there isn't competition to allow that tie stall drinking cup to provide the flow that's necessary. One of the ways to get around this is a system that was in place at Michigan State. So you have the feed table up front here. You've got a mattress here. You've got a loop going around that way. And what sat in between there was a drinking cup, water source coming down from one of the tie lines. And then you had a rubber bucket sat here with a drain on the bottom that fed to some PVC that ended up in the drop behind the cows. So once or twice a week, they pick one of the drinking cups, drop a weight on it while the cows are out, and clean out these buckets, get everything flowing out, making sure it didn't get plugged up. But the idea is that we catch most of the water that the cows slop around. And it really didn't impede. Has anybody seen those, like taking like a rubber tire, cutting a section out of it and putting it around the drinking cup? So some people have done that to keep the cow from slopping the water out. It's basically a muzzle around the cow while they're drinking. They don't seem to like it that much, but that is one effort. This doesn't seem to impede the animals in any way. So you have a string of drinking cups. They're all connected to a water line that ends up in the drop at the back. Does anybody have any interest in something like this or not? Okay, we'll go through. So when I was there, Michigan State Tysdal went through a redo. So they had their drinking cup, those rubber buckets you get at the feed store. There's a shower drain there. You had a line that brought around, emptied into the gutter behind the animals. And they went through and they said, we got to redo all this stuff. Part of it is because it's a research facility, you can't have animals stealing from one to the other, especially if you're doing an FDA trial where you're testing a drug or something like that, then you can't have cross-contamination of drugs. So there are feed doors swinging there that you, before you unhook all the animals, you have to go through and slide those feed doors into place so the animals can't steal from each other on the way out. Anybody who's dealt with Tysdals know that it's always better when you're stealing from your neighbor. So cows that run from one stall to another, stealing feed that's left behind by another cow who was saving it for later. So this is what it looked like before they started. Here's the way the buckets were. You can see that they've been sitting a while. So the black algae builds up. They went through, power washed them, and they didn't get to redoing stuff right away, but getting those mattresses in place. So you got the shower drain on the bottom, leading to a T-joint that fits into the PVC, which is bolted into place. There's a better picture of that. So they went through the redo. One of the first things they had to do was reestablish the curbs. So pouring high strength concrete, trying to get the curbs reestablished so they could reattach stuff. We had self-leveling concrete to redo the feed bed or feed table. We had marine epoxy paint to paint over everything at the end of it. And they dealt with a lot of pipe bending and all that stuff as they rebuilt. So this is the new system in place. So instead of drilling into the curbs, they have something that was bolted all the way through. They have every other stall. They're putting the water in here that's shared. On the far side, you have individual water cups for experiments that required additional water for the animals, so they can meter that out throughout the day. So they went through and they put in self-level. They went through, and one of my jobs was to spray paint or power wash the surface, so this was all pitted. So they went through, they put a layer of self-leveling concrete in there to reestablish the surface on that concrete. And then to eliminate the acid effects, they put in the marine epoxy, that gray on top, to help clean up. And it was definitely noticed how much faster and how much easier it was to clean up after that was put in. The animals, you had to do individual weigh-backs, how much the animals offered, how much they ate. You had to do individual weigh-backs each day as far for research purposes. It really accelerated how fast things got cleaned up just because it was slide. You weren't dealing with gunky, caked up stuff that was very hard to work with. It was just like sweeping it and it went much faster. So you've got that new floor in there. You're putting in the stalls. You've got the old water lines coming up. They still need to be connected. So they had 2 bars for these animals, one up high and one out front that the feed doors would swing on. So one of the problems with these stalls was the amount of obstruction going forward. So you've got that curb and then you're building stuff up on top of it to allow a place for the PVC line to be put in and protected. So that's out front. So they moved the pipe from the back of the stall divider to the front. So you can see that running in versus where the stalls were in the back. You recycling the drinking cups, getting new tubs in there, new shower drains at the bottom, and reconnecting everything to the PVC going through. So this moved the drinking cups forward. They were back on the stall. The idea is they were going to get things maybe wet in the front. That was easier to correct for than it was dealing with the somatic cell issues of the animals when the bedding got wet. So they had that system in place. This is the end where it was going down, turning and going into the gutter. It was pretty much level from one end to the other, but there'd be enough flow, especially in the middle when they were flushing it out. They drop a couple of weights in, let those drinking cups run, overflow, and that would get enough pressure in there to clean out those lines. Then they came through and they covered everything up with bedding material to protect and keep those lines in place. So another added feature, we said they couldn't have animals stealing from one another. So they had these doors that flop down and there's 2 bars. You can see one there, you pulled up on that vent section there. These are all fabricated on site. They pivot on these hinges. They flop down, you pull up the bar and it hooks on the other side of the stall so animals can't get in. You've got those dividers there that flip up, so it makes cleaning a little bit easier when you need to, or if you just don't like walking. So if you're unhooking animals, you're walking in and out of those over and over again, so that extends a number of different things there. So any questions about water and tie stalls? So let's talk about free stalls, where I think if you are interested. So what are some rules of thumb that we need to deal with tie stalls? First thing is we want at least 2 inches of water space per animal. Hot weather, 4 is nice. If there's 4 inches per animal, water doesn't seem to be a problem anymore. But at least 2 inches per animal. So we know cows are wider than 2 inches. Why do we say 2 inches per animal? How much feed space do we need per cow? Anybody remember? 2 foot, 24 inches. So this is, what's the difference here? A lot less time per day spent drinking. Then feeding, so you got 5.5 hours versus a half hour. So it seems that if you provide enough water space, that adds up to 2 inches per cow, you get the job done. So one of the discussions is, well, what is water space? So we're looking down on a trough up the dairy. We've got a float at this end under a housing. How do we measure that water space? Well, don't measure the float. That's probably a good idea. So there are some places that will measure, well, you got water space here, you got water space here, you got water space here. I'm in the opinion you just measure the front. Anybody guess why I go in that direction? Well, if you stand, as you'll find, a lot of them stand on the end. But what does that do? Blocks the front. So basically this is equal to this. So we either have a cow here or a cow there. Either way, you're not going to gain more by having that end, especially a long, narrow one. So I just use the front space, whatever that is, to establish my water space. You don't really gain much by going around. Now there are some big ones where you maybe got a couple of feet on this side. Maybe it's worth measuring around. But again, think about how the cows will position themselves, how the animals will deal with those corners, and be realistic about how much space is actually there. In a pen of animals, we like 2 or more waterers per pen. We like that front edge, 24 to 32 inches high. We don't encourage bowls or cups or those Richie waterers that they used to have. I think those were the ones where you had the balls in them and they had to push their noses down in to get water. They're great for not making sure the water doesn't freeze, but it's not a natural position going in. Their noses are completely underwater. They don't seem to like it. So bowls and cups are discouraged. We want troughs and tanks that should be long. That allows more animals to get in there at a time. They should be shallow. What do we know about how far a cow goes in the water? 2 inches, 4 inches, maybe. Doesn't need to be any deeper than that. Now, the stuff below can act as a reservoir if we don't have things that are filling fast enough. But the problem is with all that extra space, it usually gets stale and dirty and all that stuff. So if we can provide water quickly enough to that trough, it doesn't need to be that deep. So long, shallow, and quick filling, trying to get that cow to drink at that natural kind of desire position that they like. So we're looking at 6 to 8 inches deep for a standard trough. That should get it. We start to get troughs that are only this wide or this wide. They start to get deeper. You start to have that animal tilt her nose down. She's going to get her nostrils underwater and she's not going to like it. We'd like that there only be 45 feet or less between anywhere on the feed bump and the nearest waterer. So how far can you put waterers apart? You want a maximum of 45 feet between feed and waters. How far apart can our waterers be? So how are we set up there? Got water on the ends, right? Or the pens that you go around, you got a feed line down here. How far can I be away from one water to another. So this water is what, 10 feet away? 5 feet away, 10 feet away, 15, 20, 30, 40. If this is 45, here and here, what's my maximum distance? Probably 90 for a standard configuration. So cow, she gets milk, she comes back, she eats, she drinks, she lays down. We want that path from the feed, wherever she is, she should be able to get one water or another with an unobstructed pathway. So where does that, what things do we have to do to get an unobstructed pathway to waterers? Alleyways wide enough, there's got to be either the animals are coming in, eating in small groups, so you can get behind them, get whatever direction. I don't want to drink with that one. She scares me. I'm going to go over here. Or you have to have the ability for two animals to pass behind an eating animal, that 8 feet behind the butt end of a feeding animal. So 100 waters is fairly standard. No dead ends. We don't want waterers, or we prefer waterers not to be on a dead end. So what are the advantage of the waterers and on cross outs? Animals can approach them from a lot of different directions. So if you got a dominant animal on one end, the animals can either go to this one or slip in here on this end and still get a drink of water. If there is a dead end, like there's an alleyway, you got some of these old barns that have been cobbled together, one after another. You got this area in a corner where the water is, a dominant animal can control that resource. And the cow say, well, I don't want to drink because I don't want to deal with that mean old cow. And she can just stand there and dominate it. If there's more than one, she can't dominate both at the same time. If it's a dead end, her just standing there is going to impede the flow. So we want to have multiple approaches to our waterers if we can. So animals can get in and out easily and their dominance can't be a problem. So going back to our handout there, or our guide. So we talked about these already. If you're dealing with a freestall, either we're going to add more water space, find another way to get water in, increase the pressure and flow to individual waters, or clean more frequently. There was a farm up in Canastota, ABC Farms. They've since moved north. I think the Durfee brothers have taken over their space. But you had a barn that was built by people that had a lot of access to metal, but really didn't know what they were doing as far as the best facilities for a cow. So everything is steel, everything, you've got liners on the floors that are steel, you've got bumpers all over the place. But one of the things they didn't do was they didn't make the eaves high enough for a naturally ventilated barn. So we'll get to in a couple of weeks, you have to have a certain size opening for 1 mile an hour to move through a building and clean out all the air. Now, when I went and stood in the stall out on the outside edge, I could touch the eaves. I'm not the tallest person in the world. So the eaves were low, which meant the ventilation was not adequate, which meant those animals would overheat in the summer. They weren't getting enough water. And there were some things about the management of those animals, the way they brought them to and from the parlor. They keep them away from feed for an extra time, and they keep away from water, which were on the back side. So you had waterers that were stretched or spaced 200 feet per. And they were also experimenting with feeding or drinking, putting whey in the water fountains or in the water sources. Cows didn't really seem to like that all that much. Anybody feed water whey? How's it work for you guys? Go in the feed, that seems to be the best way to do it, but piping it up to the water supply, it's just not what you want to drink in the summertime, right? So you had the system, very long barn, 600 feet. From a stall perspective, they were 2 rows. So you had this side and this side on the outside edge. And you have waterers like right here, here, and here. You had crossovers in certain spots to get things done. What they do is they had 2 pens in a row. So they lock the animals forward near the feed for milking. And they take this group up this way and then send them back. So these animals were milked and then they spent a lot of time in front. So when they brought that other group back, they opened up the gates. This was the first access they would have to water in like 2 hours. So you saw a lot of animals that figured the system out that they knew because they brought these animals to the pen back here. They'd open up this gate first, this gate second, and this gate last for the animals to get across. There were animals, and because they had sand bedding, they could do this. Animals that would come in here and gallop all the way down here to be first on this water, knowing that it was going to take a while for those animals to get the person to walk down to get this gate open. The animals would run to this one, run to this one, and run all the way down to this one. I mean, galloping. So to get there first on the water, and they'd be waiting, those animals would be waiting, especially the ones that had water and not whey in them. They'd be waiting 2 or 3 deep to get their turn to drink. And after a while, you know, they gave up. They weren't drinking what they could. So one of the things when we worked with that in this class is we said we need to increase water. We can't lift up the barn to get better ventilation. We need to get more water, and hopefully that would work. So they had an underutilized parlor, a double 30. They were only using like a double 20 at the time. And what they did with the parallel is there was a whole lot of space here, and they put a piece of PVC, 2-foot PVC, they cut the top off and put ends on it and then put a float in it. So on this side and this side, so probably about $500 on both sides. They put that in, and the cows in the summer, we didn't get to see that as a class, but in the summertime, they open up, lift up the front of the parallel. All the animals would walk in unison to the water trough, drink their fill, and then leave. That worked out to 4 pounds per cow per day on a 500 cow dairy. So $500 investment in just getting them more water in summertime led to 4 pounds per cow per day. Now, I don't think you can really fix the ventilation problems. You'll understand how that goes going forward, but something simple as getting them more water and having that, taking it off the plate cooler, putting it in that, those PVC troughs that they made. So what does that work out to? 500 cows times 4, an extra 2 tons of milk per day. So that's gonna pay for that $500 pretty quick. So making sure that they get enough water is an important thing. So we're looking at calves that today. If water provided, we need to do that. That's tough this time of year. Not as tough in there, but I grew up with hutches. Breaking out those water blocks every day was a challenge. But is water provided? Is the water clean? Is the water too close to the feed? So what do they have to do up at the dairy with the animals up there? How does the water and the feed on each of those pens for each of those cows work? Anybody taking time to notice? How do they get from one to the other? They gotta back up, move over, and stick their head in on the other side. It'd be a lot easier if they could go one to another with one's head through, but the downside of that is the stuff that's stuck to their lips and their nose from a feed perspective tends to end up in the water. And that makes the water dirtier faster. So we run into problems faster. So the general recommendation is if you've got a setup like we have up there, you separate the water and the feed. So the stuff falls off their noses, their mouth before they get into the water. So we're looking at a few gallons a day, like 4 weeks, certainly depending on the weather. So having a couple gallons in the morning, a couple gallons in the afternoon. The reason we have this is for rumen development and successful weaning. We're trying to wean an animal faster than nature would intend it. What do we know with beef cows? When do they usually wean off? 6 months? What are we trying to do? 8 weeks, 6 weeks. I know some places that can do it in 4. The sooner we get them off milk, the better off we are because of what? Cost. Protein from feed is cheaper than protein from milk. Now, what we're doing up the dairy is somewhere in between. We're getting rid of high somatic cell to increase our income. Get those premiums across all of our milk. But if we don't provide water and we do the standard 2 quarts in the morning, 2 quarts at night, they'll get enough water to survive. Their body will adjust, but they won't get the speed of rumen development. We need water in there to keep that rumen environment where it needs to be to start the fermentation. Once we start the fermentation, we can get those fatty acids produced and they foster the rumen development. So we need water, additional water, particularly in the summer, if we're going to get any sort of rumen development. And making that transition, they need water to consume feed. To make that transition from a milk-fed animal to a starter-fed animal, we need water on the rumen, in the rumen, to make sure that happens and they don't starve to death while they're finishing their rumen development when we take the milk away. So making sure we got fresh, ample drinking water as much as they'll drink. The little ones don't drink all that much as they get a little older. Making sure we have gallons, depending on the time of year, is important. And we talk about the separation. They drink through one opening and they have feed through the other. That avoids the cross-contamination of water to the feed, which leads to snotty, moldy feed. And then the feed to the water, we're dropping stuff in there and making that water funky, especially in the summertime. So some distance or space separating the two. So how do we know we need more water? We can certainly look at the things that are related to a lack of water. So abnormally firm manure, we're in that 4 and 5 range. Animals are not drinking what they could. And this is across a group of animals, not just one that's sick or not feeling good or anything like that. Looking at their urine output. Now, we're not going to sit there with a gallon pitcher and measure everything that comes out, but how do we know that the animal's dehydrated from a urine perspective? It gets dark, right? So that's how you know that you're not drinking enough water in summer. Things are a little darker when you go to the bathroom than they should be. So we get decreased intake, decreased milk production associated with less water. It may not be bad milk production, but there's still an opportunity to be better, have a little bit more as we go through. So we have some guidelines and stuff. I think we covered most everything in your handout, your guide. So what do we do with pens? How do we put all that stuff together? I think I went through and I changed all the typos this year. So everything we've covered related to that. We'll go through the water system worksheet for calves. We'll start there in lab, and then we'll go down and check with pens and work our way through that sheet. So we'll see you in lab.